I'll never forget the sound of my mother-in-law's hand hitting my 5-year-old daughter's face at Christmas dinner. The crack echoed through that pristine dining room like a gunshot, and 20 relatives just kept eating their glazed ham like nothing happened. But what my 8-year-old son said next made everyone at that table freeze, and it exposed a secret that would destroy our family forever. My name is Brooke, and I need to tell you what happened last Christmas at the Hawthorne family dinner, because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect our children become their greatest threat, and sometimes it takes a child's courage to reveal what adults choose to ignore. Picture this. My daughter, Penny, 5 years old with strawberry blonde curls and a gap-toothed smile, wearing her special Christmas dress with the red sparkly bow she'd picked out weeks earlier. She was so excited that morning, twirling in front of the mirror, asking me if Grandma would think she looked pretty. I told her yes, even though I knew Judith had never once complimented either of my children in the 7 years I'd been married to her son. Then there's my son Colton, 8 years old, dark hair like his father, but with my green eyes that see everything. He's the quiet one, the observer, the kid who notices when adults think children aren't paying attention. That morning, while Penny twirled, Colton sat on his bed, carefully combing his hair the way Grandma Judith insisted boys should look. "Presentable," she called it. I should have noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he buttoned his dress shirt. My husband Trevor, 36 years old, successful middle manager at a consulting firm, the golden child who could do no wrong in his mother's eyes. He was already stressed that morning, checking his watch every 5 minutes, reminding us we couldn't be late. "You know how Mom gets about punctuality," he said, straightening his tie for the 3rd time. Trevor inherited his mother's sharp features, but not her cruel streak, though he'd inherited something worse, the inability to stand up to her. And then there was Judith herself, 62 years old, silver hair always perfectly coiffed, wearing pearls that cost more than most people's cars. She ruled the Hawthorne family like a queen holding court, and everyone from Trevor's siblings to distant cousins knew their place in her hierarchy. I was at the bottom, the small-town girl who'd somehow tricked her precious son into marriage. My children ranked only slightly higher, useful for Facebook photos and bragging rights at her country club, but little else. That Christmas dinner was supposed to be like every other mandatory family gathering at Judith's colonial mansion in Westchester. 20 relatives crammed around her mahogany dining table, eating off china that had been in the family for 3 generations. The same forced conversations, the same subtle insults disguised as concern, the same way everyone pretended not to notice when Judith's criticisms cut too deep. But this time would be different. This time, my 8-year-old son would reveal what he'd been documenting for months. This time, the silence would finally break. What you need to understand before I tell you what happened is that abuse doesn't always look like bruises and broken bones. Sometimes it looks like a grandmother who smiles for photos while whispering threats to a child. Sometimes it looks like a room full of adults who choose comfort over conscience. And sometimes it looks like a little boy secretly taking pictures on his mom's old phone, building evidence because he knows no one will believe him without proof. The sound of that slap still wakes me up at night. Not just the physical sound, but what it represented. Years of hidden cruelty finally spilling into the open where it couldn't be ignored. Penny's blood on the white tablecloth, 20 forks suspended in midair, and Colton, my brave, brilliant boy, standing up with the kind of courage most adults never find. "Grandma, should I show everyone the bruises you said to hide?" Those 11 words changed everything. They exposed a truth that had been festering beneath the surface of every family gathering, every holiday photo, every forced smile. They revealed that while we'd been protecting Judith's reputation, she'd been hurting our children. I'm sharing this story because I learned something that day. Evil thrives in silence, especially when that evil wears pearls and hosts Christmas dinner. And sometimes the youngest voices are the only ones brave enough to shatter that silence. This is the story of how my family fell apart and came back together stronger. This is the story of how my son saved his sister. This is the story of the Christmas dinner that ended with police sirens instead of dessert. 7 years ago, I married into the Hawthorne family thinking I'd won the lottery. Trevor was handsome, successful, and came from what everyone called good stock. His family had money, influence, and a beautiful colonial house in Westchester where they hosted gatherings that looked like something out of a magazine. I was 27, a school nurse from a small town in Pennsylvania, and I thought I'd found my happily ever after. The first time I met Judith, she looked me up and down like she was appraising livestock at an auction. "So you're the girl Trevor's been talking about," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "How charming that you work with children. Such a noble profession for those who can't afford higher education." Trevor laughed it off later, telling me his mother was just protective, that she'd warm up once she got to know me. She never did. Our wedding was a masterclass in subtle sabotage. Judith insisted on planning everything since Brooke's family wouldn't know the first thing about proper society weddings. She invited 200 of her closest friends and gave my family a table in the back corner. During her toast, she spent 10 minutes talking about Trevor's ex-girlfriend, Catherine, the surgeon who got away. "But I suppose we all make choices," she concluded, raising her champagne toward me. "Welcome to the family, Brooke." When Colton was born a year later, Judith suddenly became interested in our lives, her first grandson, the heir to the Hawthorne name. She'd show up unannounced, criticizing how I held him, how I fed him, how I dressed him. "In my day, mothers knew how to properly care for children," she'd say, taking him from my arms. "But I suppose standards have changed." Trevor never saw it as criticism. To him, his mother was just being helpful. 3 years later, when Penny arrived, Judith's interest cooled considerably. A granddaughter was less valuable currency at the country club. She'd cow over Penny when others were watching, but the moment we were alone, the mask would drop. "Another mouth to feed on Trevor's salary," she once muttered while I was nursing. "I hope you're not planning on more." The mandatory family gatherings were exercises in endurance. Judith's house had rules, spoken and unspoken. Children must be silent unless spoken to. Everyone must dress appropriately, which meant whatever Judith deemed acceptable that particular day. Dinner conversation followed her lead, usually circling around Trevor's siblings and their achievements. Trevor's sister Darlene sold luxury real estate and never missed a chance to mention her latest $1 million closing. His brother Grant managed a bank branch and had married Meredith, a pediatrician from a family Judith approved of. Their children, twin boys named Harrison and Frederick, were held up as examples of proper breeding and behavior. "Look how nicely Harrison sits," Judith would say, gesturing to the 6-year-old who looked terrified to move. "Some children understand decorum." The Christmas dinner tradition was the worst of all gatherings. Judith insisted everyone arrive by noon for cocktails, though children were immediately sent to the basement playroom with strict instructions not to disturb the adults. Dinner was served at exactly 3 o'clock, with assigned seating that never changed. Trevor and I were always placed at opposite ends of the table, making it impossible to present a united front. That morning, as we prepared to leave for Judith's house, I noticed Colton organizing his clothes with unusual precision. "Grandma likes my shirt tucked in exactly right," he explained, smoothing down his collar for the 5th time. "She gets upset when it's bunched up." "When did she tell you that?" I asked. "Last time when you were helping Aunt Darlene in the kitchen. She said I looked like a vagrant." My stomach tightened. "Honey, do you know what that word means? Someone poor and messy. But I'm not, am I, Mom?" I hugged him tight, feeling rage bubble up inside me. "You're perfect exactly as you are." Penny bounced into the room wearing her Christmas dress, the red one with the sparkly bow she'd begged for at Target. "Will Grandma like my dress, Mommy?" Before I could answer, Trevor appeared in the doorway, already in his suit. "We need to leave in 10 minutes. Mom doesn't like when we're late." "Your mother doesn't like a lot of things," I muttered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. It means nothing." I'd learned that arguing about Judith was pointless. Trevor had been trained from birth to never question her, never challenge her, never see her for what she really was. The drive to Westchester took 40 minutes. Trevor gripped the steering wheel, running through his mental checklist of conversation topics that would please his mother. Updates on his promotion track, Colton's grades, anything but my job, which Judith considered beneath the Hawthorne name. "Remember," he said as we pulled into the circular driveway. "Best behavior, everyone. It's just one afternoon." One afternoon. If only we'd known it would be the last. The moment Judith opened her front door, I knew this Christmas would be different. She hugged Trevor like he'd returned from war, then looked past me entirely to address the children. "Colton, you're getting so tall. Penelope, that's quite a colorful dress." The way she said colorful made it sound like a disease. "Thank you, Grandma." Penny beamed, doing a little twirl. "Mommy said you'd like it." Judith's eyes flicked to me, cold as December wind. Did she now? How thoughtful of your mother to speak for me. We entered the house, which smelled of cinnamon and expensive candles, every surface gleaming like a museum display. The other relatives had already arrived. Trevor's brother Grant stood by the fireplace discussing investment portfolios with Uncle Raymond, while Darlene held court near the piano, showing off photos of her latest beach house listing on her phone. "Brooke!" Darlene called out with fake enthusiasm. "Still working at that little elementary school? How quaint that you're still doing that." "I love my job," I replied, helping Penny out of her coat. "Of course you do," Judith interjected. "Someone has to do those kinds of jobs. Not everyone can have ambition." Colton pressed closer to my side, and I noticed he was avoiding eye contact with everyone. When Cousin Meredith tried to greet him, he barely whispered hello. This wasn't like him. My son was quiet, yes, but never rude. "Colton, honey, are you feeling okay?" I knelt beside him. He glanced quickly at Judith, then back at me. "My stomach hurts a little." "Since when?" "Since yesterday, when Dad brought us here to help Grandma set up," he said quietly. "When you were at the store getting the pie ingredients." I hadn't known about that visit. Trevor hadn't mentioned taking the kids to his mother's house while I was running errands. "What happened yesterday?" "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Can I stay with you instead of going to the playroom?" Judith's voice cut through the air. "Nonsense. Children belong in the playroom. Harrison and Frederick are already down there. Colton, take your sister downstairs, now." The sharpness in her tone made Penny's face fall. She'd been hoping to show off her dress to more relatives first. Colton took his sister's hand protectively, and they headed toward the basement stairs. I watched them go, unease settling in my chest like a stone. During cocktail hour, I tried to stay near the kitchen, helping Judith's housekeeper Rosa arrange appetizers. Rosa had worked for the family for 15 years and was the only person who ever showed me genuine kindness in that house. "The children okay?" Rosa asked quietly in her accented English. "I think so. Why?" She glanced toward the living room where Judith was holding court. "Yesterday, I hear crying. The boy. Senora Judith was very angry about something." Before I could ask more, Judith appeared in the doorway. "Brooke, we don't pay Rosa to chat. Perhaps you could make yourself useful and check on the children instead of hiding in here." I went downstairs to find Harrison and Frederick building with blocks while Penny sat alone, talking to her doll. Colton stood by the window watching the snow fall. "Where's your sister's cousin Meredith?" I asked Harrison. "Grandma Judith said Penny talks too much and gives people headaches, so we're not supposed to play with her." My hands clenched. I sat down next to Penny, pulling her into my lap. "You want to tell me about your Christmas pageant, sweetheart?" Her face lit up as she launched into the story, describing every costume, every song, every moment. Colton came over and sat beside us, and for a few minutes we were in our own little bubble, away from the toxicity upstairs. Then Judith's voice echoed down the stairs. "Dinner!" The dining room table was set with the hawthorn china, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier. Place cards indicated our seats, and as always, Trevor was near his mother, while I was banished to the far end between Uncle Raymond's deaf mother and Grant's 4-year-old twins. The meal began with Judith's traditional blessing, thanking God for family, prosperity, and the wisdom to maintain proper standards in an increasingly common world. She looked directly at me during that last part. Penny, excited to be at the big table, started bouncing in her seat. When the rolls came around, she reached excitedly for one, accidentally knocking over her water glass. The water spread across the white tablecloth, darkening the pristine fabric. "Oh no," Penny gasped. I'm sorry. Judith's face transformed into something ugly. "This is exactly what happens when children aren't properly disciplined. They act like animals instead of human beings." "It was an accident," I said, starting to rise from my seat. "Sit down, Brooke. You've done enough damage teaching her that behavior is acceptable." Trevor said nothing, just stared at his plate. The other relatives continued eating as if nothing was happening. Penny, nervous and trying to make things better, started rambling. At my Christmas pageant, Miss Rodriguez said I was the best angel and my wings were so pretty, and I remembered all my lines and didn't forget even once, and Mommy made my halo, and... The slap came so fast I didn't see Judith's hand move until it connected with Penny's face. The sound of Judith's palm striking my 5-year-old daughter's face seemed to echo forever. Penny's head snapped to the side, her eyes wide with shock before the pain registered. Then came the blood, a bright red line trickling from her split lip onto her Christmas dress, the one she'd been so proud of that morning. "Shut up like your useless mother!" Judith's voice was venomous. "No one wants to hear your babbling." For a moment, the entire room froze. Then, horrifyingly, forks began moving again. Uncle Raymond cut into his ham. Aunt Francine reached for her wine glass. Grant cleared his throat and asked Harrison about his math grades. 20 adults continued their Christmas dinner while my baby sat there bleeding. I shot up from my chair so fast it scraped against the floor. "What did you just do?" "I disciplined a child who clearly needs it," Judith said calmly, dabbing her mouth with her napkin as if she hadn't just assaulted my daughter. "Something you're apparently incapable of doing." I moved toward Penny, but Judith stood, blocking my path. "Sit down, Brooke. You're making a scene." "Making a scene? You just hit my child." I gave her a tap for misbehaving. In my day, children knew their place. Trevor finally spoke, his voice weak and pathetic. "Mom, that was a bit harsh." Judith whirled on him. "Don't you dare question me in my own home, Trevor. I raised 3 successful children. This one," she gestured dismissively at me, "can't even teach a 5-year-old basic table manners." I pushed past Judith and knelt beside Penny, whose shoulders were shaking with silent sobs. She'd learned not to cry loudly in this house. Using my cloth napkin, I gently dabbed at her lip, my nursing training taking over even as rage burned through my veins. The cut wasn't deep, but her lip was already swelling. "It's okay, baby," I whispered. "Mommy's here." "It hurts," she whimpered, so quietly only I could hear. "I know, sweetheart, we're going to leave." Darlene finally showed a flicker of humanity. "Maybe we should get some ice for her lip." "Ice?" Judith scoffed. "For that tiny tap? You're all being ridiculous. The child needs to learn she can't monopolize adult conversation with her meaningless chatter." "She's 5 years old." I stood, lifting Penny into my arms. "She was excited about her Christmas pageant." "Exactly. 5 years old and unable to control herself. What will people think when she acts this way in public?" "What will people think?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're worried about appearances while my daughter is bleeding?" Grant's wife Meredith shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should all calm down. It's Christmas." "Yes, let's all calm down," Judith said, returning to her seat. "Brooke, stop coddling the child. You're teaching her to be weak." I looked around the table at these people, these cowards who sat there eating their expensive meal while a grandmother abused her grandchild. Aunt Francine was studying her green beans intently. Uncle Raymond had sudden fascination with the ceiling. Even Rosa, hovering in the doorway, looked away. "Trevor," I said, my voice sharp, "we're leaving. Get Colton." My husband, the father of these children, the man who promised to protect our family, shook his head. "Brooke, don't overreact. It's Christmas dinner. Mom didn't mean any harm." "Didn't mean harm? Look at your daughter's face." Penny buried her head in my shoulder, blood from her lips staining my dress. I could feel her trembling, feel her trying to make herself smaller, and something inside me snapped. "You know what? You can all go to hell, every single one of you who sits here pretending this is normal." "Such language," Judith tutted. "No wonder the children have no manners." "My children have beautiful manners," I shot back. "They also have something none of you possess. They have empathy. They have kindness. They have courage." "Courage?" Grant laughed mockingly. "Teaching them to throw tantrums is courage?" That's when I noticed Colton had been silent through all of this. My 8-year-old son sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, his face pale but determined. He was looking at Judith with an expression I'd never seen before. Not fear, not anger. Something else entirely. Resolution. "We're leaving." I announced again, louder this time, "and we're never coming back." Judith laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "Don't be dramatic, Brooke. You'll be back next week when Trevor talks sense into you. You always come back. Where else would you go? Back to your little apartment in Pennsylvania? Back to your parents' trailer?" "My parents' house might be small, but it's filled with love, something this mansion will never have." "Love?" Judith stood again, her face twisted with contempt. "Love doesn't pay for private schools. Love doesn't open doors. Love doesn't matter in the real world." "You're right," I said, holding Penny tighter. "Your version of love doesn't matter. Your version of love comes with bruises." The room went quiet. Too quiet. That's when Colton stood up. Colton stood up slowly, his small hands steady on the table. At 8 years old, he looked both terrifyingly young and impossibly brave. His voice, when it came, was clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Grandma, should I show everyone the bruises you said to hide?" The silence that followed was absolute. Forks suspended midway to mouths, wine glasses frozen in mid-sip. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to pause its ticking. Judith's face went from red to white in seconds. "What nonsense are you talking about, child?" "The bruises," Colton repeated, his voice gaining strength. "The ones on my arms from when you grabbed me yesterday because I didn't fold the napkins into triangles correctly. Or the one on my back from when you pushed me into the doorframe last month because I spoke without being asked a question." "You're lying," Judith sputtered. "You're making up stories like your mother teaches you." "I have pictures." Colton reached into his pocket and pulled out my old phone, the one I'd given him to play games on. "Mom's a nurse. She taught me that if someone hurts you at school, you should document it. So I've been documenting." He turned the phone screen toward the table, swiping through image after image. Purple fingerprints on thin arms, a bruise spreading across his shoulder blade, a scabbed-over cut behind his ear. Each photo had a date stamp. "October 15th, he narrated calmly. "That's when you twisted my ear until it bled because I didn't say good morning loudly enough. November 3rd, you pinched my thigh under the table so hard I couldn't walk right for 2 days because I reached for seconds without permission. November 28th, Thanksgiving, you grabbed my wrist and bent it backwards because I laughed at something Penny said during dinner." Darlene gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mother, is this true?" "The boy is disturbed," Judith said, but her voice had lost its authority. "He probably did those things to himself for attention." "There's also a video," Colton continued, as if she hadn't spoken. He tapped the screen, and suddenly Judith's voice filled the room from the phone's speaker. "You worthless little brat, you think you're special because your mother coddles you? You're nothing. You're weak and stupid just like her. And if you tell anyone about our little corrections, I'll make sure your sister gets double." In the video, you could hear Colton crying, see Judith's manicured hand gripping his small shoulder hard enough to leave marks. "That's from Thanksgiving," Colton said simply. "When Mom was helping clean up and Dad was watching football, you said you were teaching me how to be a man." Trevor jumped up from his chair, the first real emotion I'd seen from him all day. "You've been hurting my son? My 8-year-old son." "I was disciplining him," Judith shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "Someone has to since you married that trash who doesn't know the first thing about raising children properly." "Properly?" I stood, still holding Penny, who had gone silent against my shoulder. "You call child abuse proper?" Grant was scrolling through the photos on Colton's phone, his face growing paler with each image. "Jesus Christ, Mother! Some of these go back months. Why didn't you tell us?" He looked at Colton with something approaching horror. "Because Grandma said no one would believe me," Colton answered. "She said everyone loves her more than they love me. She said if I told, she'd make sure Dad divorced Mom and we'd never see him again." Meredith, who'd been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "Oh my God, Harrison Frederick, come here right now." She gathered her twins against her, studying them with medical precision. "Have Grandma Judith ever hurt you?" Harrison, the older twin by 3 minutes, looked at his brother, then at his parents. "She pulls our hair sometimes, when no one's looking." The room erupted. Relatives talking over each other, accusations flying, denials and recriminations filling the air. But through it all, Colton stood perfectly still, my phone in his hand, watching Judith with those steady green eyes. I kept evidence because Mom taught me that nurses and doctors always document everything, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. She said evidence protects people, so I protected myself and Penny. You little monster, Judith snarled, lunging toward him. Trevor caught her arm, and for the first time in 7 years, I saw him truly stand up to his mother. Don't you dare touch my son again. Your son. Your son. Judith laughed hysterically. You're nothing without me, Trevor. I made you. I gave you everything. You gave me trauma, Trevor said quietly, and the room went silent again. You gave me years of therapy I haven't had the courage to get. You gave me the inability to protect my own children because I was still scared of you. Uncle Raymond finally spoke, his voice gruff. I'm calling the police. Don't be ridiculous, Judith snapped. I'm a pillar of this community. No one will believe this nonsense. They'll believe video evidence, I said. They'll believe documented injuries on a child. They'll believe multiple witnesses who just heard you admit to it. Judith looked around the room at her family, her kingdom crumbling before her eyes. Darlene had moved away from her. Grant was still staring at the photos in horror. Even Francine, her own sister, had tears streaming down her face. Colton, I said softly, how long have you been planning this? My son looked up at me, and for the first time all day he smiled. Since October. I knew she'd hurt Penny eventually. She always hurts the smallest person in the room. I just had to wait until there were enough witnesses. The police arrived within 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. 2 officers took statements while Penny clung to me, her split lip now purple and swollen. Colton sat between Trevor and me, calmly showing the officers his documented evidence, speaking with the kind of clarity that made them exchange concerned looks. This is ridiculous, Judith kept repeating to anyone who would listen. I'm on the hospital board. I run charity galas. This is a family misunderstanding being blown out of proportion. But the officer reviewing Colton's photos wasn't interested in her social status. Ma'am, these images show a clear pattern of physical abuse, combined with the video evidence and multiple witnesses to tonight's assault on a 5-year-old. We have more than enough for charges. Darlene was the one who surprised me most. I'll testify, she said quietly. I've seen things over the years. Ignored them. Told myself it was just Mom being strict. But I knew. We all knew something wasn't right. Grant nodded, his arm around his twins. The boys told me more on the way to the car. About hair pulling, pinching, threats if they cried. How did we let this happen? Because she trained us not to see it, Trevor said, his voice hollow. Just like she trained us to accept it when we were kids. The investigation that followed revealed the depth of Judith's cruelty. Rosa, freed from fear of losing her job, came forward with dates and incidents she'd witnessed. The country club mothers admitted they'd noticed Judith's rough handling of children at events. Even the family pediatrician said he'd had concerns, but no proof. We filed a restraining order immediately. Trevor threw himself into therapy with the dedication he'd once reserved for pleasing his mother. 3 months in, he broke down completely. Remembering incidents from his own childhood he'd buried so deep he'd convinced himself they never happened. She used to lock me in the closet, he told me one night, hours at a time, said it would make me stronger. I was 6. Penny required play therapy to deal with the trauma. For weeks she'd flinch whenever anyone raised their hand near her, even just to reach for something. But kids are resilient when they're surrounded by love and support. 6 months later, she was laughing again, though she still occasionally asked if Grandma Judith could come back and hurt her. Never, I'd tell her. Colton made sure of that. Colton became something of a hero at his school when the story inevitably got out, but he didn't want the attention. I just did what you taught me, Mom, he said. Document everything and protect the people who can't protect themselves. The family split completely. Half-sided with Judith, claiming we'd blown things out of proportion, that every generation had different disciplinary methods. They sent nasty emails about how we'd destroyed a good woman's reputation. I blocked them all. The other half underwent their own reckonings. Darlene started therapy and discovered her anxiety disorders stemmed from childhood trauma she'd never addressed. Grant's wife, Meredith, instituted a no unsupervised grandparent time rule that extended to her own parents, just to be safe. Uncle Raymond apologized to me personally, said he'd been a coward, that he should have spoken up years ago when he noticed things weren't right. Judith was ultimately charged with assault and multiple counts of child abuse. She got community service and mandatory anger management, her lawyer arguing that her age and standing in the community warranted leniency. The real punishment was social. The country club quietly revoked her membership. The hospital board asked her to step down. The society ladies who'd once fawned over her now crossed the street to avoid her. She sent letters for a while, all addressed to Trevor, alternating between rage and manipulation. I gave you everything. You've destroyed our family. No one will ever love you like I do. We marked them all returned to sender, unopened. Today, a year later, our family is smaller but stronger. We spend holidays at my parents' house in Pennsylvania, where the house might be modest but no one has to earn the right to speak, where Penny can tell her rambling stories without fear, where Colton doesn't have to document injuries because there are none to document. Trevor asked me once if I could forgive him for not protecting our children. I told him the truth. Forgiveness would take time, but watching him fight to become a better father, a better protector, was a start. The last time someone asked about Judith, Penny said, "We don't have a Grandma Judith anymore. We have Nana and Pop-Pop who love us." And Colton, my wise, brave boy who saved us all, simply said, "Sometimes losing toxic people isn't a loss at all. It's freedom." I learned that staying silent to keep the peace isn't peace. It's complicity wrapped in cowardice. I learned that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths, and I learned that real family isn't about blood or money or social standing. It's about who stands up for you when standing up costs them everything. Most importantly, I learned that an 8-year-old with a phone and the courage to document abuse can bring down an empire built on fear. Some bridges, once burned, light the way to better places, and some families become stronger when they become smaller. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that standing up to abuse is always worth it, no matter who the abuser is. Your support helps these important stories reach people who might be suffering in silence. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories that remind us all that courage comes in all sizes, sometimes as small as an 8-year-old boy with a phone and a plan. Thank you for listening, and remember, document everything, protect the vulnerable, and never be afraid to break the silence.